Hey everyone, this is Jason here, and I wanted to take a moment to give you a little bit of a breakdown on this upcoming episode. So what follows is a pretty epic discussion between myself and Jesse from the Sudden But Inevitable podcast, and it is specifically with regards to the final 6 episodes of the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. So, we are going to do a lot of jumping around, and there's going to be a lot of allusions to earlier parts of the series. All of that to say that unlike a lot of our films, if you have not seen the episode, I really wouldn't recommend listening to this. I would go back, I would watch the entire series first, and then after that I would watch the film End of Evangelion, which is going to retell the final 2 episodes of the series, because Jesse and I afterwards are going to be looking at that film as well, and spending about close to an hour 45 on that. So what you can expect is a 3-part, 3.5-hour conversation breaking down the final 6 episodes of the series, followed by a 2-part, 1 hour and 45-minute conversation about the film that retells the final 2 episodes of the series. So all of this will be parceled out over the following couple of months, and in between that we will have our 5-minute reviews strewn between them, just in case there's a lot of you out there that haven't listened. So hopefully you enjoy this epic breakdown of Neon Genesis Evangelion. If you haven't watched it, please go do so right now. It is a wonderful, wonderful program, and we will catch you back here to break down a lot of the more mysterious elements.
You are here for me to enlighten you.
You ever act like this again, you're barred for life.
It's just violent bass.
It's kind of embarrassing.
If you know your lines, then you can forget them.
Oh, I get it. It's very clever.
Hello, peoples, and welcome to Esoterica Cinema, the podcast where we take films from the cinematic multiverse and discuss the hell out of them. I am your host, Jason Peters, and with me today is not Ryan Siebold. I know, crazy, right? You've got one of us without the other. What the hell is going on in this bizarro world? Well, we should remind you that we are in our off-season, and during this off-season, that's right, we're getting experimental out here. You know, going into some psychedelic stuff, which actually is going to parlay well into the show. That's right, not film, but show that we're watching today. It's almost blasphemy. I know, Esoterica Cinema. But look, this is a fantastic show that definitely has a lot of cinematic qualities, rife with metaphors, open to interpretation. It's going to be a fantastic discussion today. We are looking at, as I'm sure you've already looked at from the title card, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is an anime from the late 90s. I know, anime, right? Crazy. We did a little bit of Japanese animation earlier with Perfect Blue, and so this is kind of an extension of that. So, if no Ryan, does that mean you're going to be stuck with me for 2 hours, an hour and a half, however the hell long this is going to go? No, I have brought in a friend of the show. That's right. Straight from the Sudden But Inevitable podcast, which is a sci-fi rewatch podcast dedicated to single-season television shows. I have brought over Mr. Jesse Bailey. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I have to get this out of the way. I have listened to your show at least 6 or 7 times. I did listen to the aforementioned Perfect Blue episode, and I really enjoyed that.
Thanks,
but
man.
Yes, as Jason mentioned, normally I am bringing my crew through a space western. Usually it's a sci-fi series, but it's almost exclusively been space westerns so far. And the way that our show came about was he was like, you got to watch Book of... He said, you got to watch Mandalorian with me. And I went, I don't want to watch that. It looks like a Boba Fett ripoff. Turns out The Mandalorian was pretty enjoyable. So I kept going, this is a lot like Firefly. And he went, I've never seen Firefly. And I went, I'm about to start a podcast. And I did. And I forced him through Firefly 1 episode at a time. We brought him through Serenity. He properly hates me now. But I used that as a springboard to get him into another thing he doesn't like, which is anime, fittingly enough. And I drug him through Cowboy Bebop 1 episode at a time, just in time so that he could watch the live-action Netflix Cowboy Bebop with me, which was then canceled, which made it eligible to be covered by our show, which we are now doing. So it's just a very perfect sci-fi blend of anime and, you know, all of those little pieces falling together that have brought me here to talk about Neon Genesis with you, Jason. I got to tell you, man, I am very, very excited to talk about this series. Nobody on my crew has seen it, so I don't often get the opportunity to speak on this. I'm very excited. Let's go.
Awesome. Definitely. Me too. And yeah, and just a little bit of color for all the people listening. So I am not an anime guy. Like, are you like historically an anime guy? Are you pretty well like deep into it? Have you done a lot of the shows?
I think by like the anime fan community standard, I would probably still be considered a neophyte.
Okay.
I just saw this series, for example, 2 years ago, and I did, spoiler alert, really enjoy myself, but I hadn't seen it prior to that. I hadn't seen it prior to it being available on Netflix. But I did binge it over the course of like 2 days the first time that I saw it. So I'm very open to anime. I like to push people into watching it, and I'd like to point out to them, hey, I know that in the Western world, animation is for children. That's just kind of a weird paradigm that we've ended up in, right? Where, and we could blame, if blame is the right word, we could blame Disney for that. But I think it's important to look at anime as just a medium and not as a genre, right? Because a lot of people go, I don't like anime because I don't like that genre. And it's important to go, that's actually not a genre. It's a medium. There are 100 genres within it, just like any other storytelling medium, right? Just like a book or a movie, if you will. So I think that resistance to it can be natural because it does look very different from what most Western audiences are used to. But I think that that's kind of the perfect inroad to the medium, because if you ask yourself, okay, why am I resistant to that? There's your inroad. Now you can look at this piece in front of you from a slightly different angle, because you could even go into it knowingly resistant and still get something out of it if you go in going, why am I resistant to the things that I'm seeing? And man,
sure.
I mean, as far as reputation goes, I mean, anime itself has a reputation, right? But this series, the reputation for this series, like when I heard that it was going to be on Netflix 2 years ago, I went, oh, I'm going to finally get to watch that series that everybody always talks about, in the fandom circles. And
yeah,
I was elated. I was really excited. And I knew going in, like, okay, everybody, is telling me this is going to be like this crazy experience and you better be ready. And I'm like, it is a TV show about giant robots. I'm sure I will be okay. Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I could not have been further off the mark. And I think anytime you can go into something with your arms crossed and come out on the other side of it with a full heart for the thing you've seen is impressive. And that definitely captures my experience with this series. And I think that it's set up to give that experience. So I'm interested to hear your experience. I've actually never, like I said, I haven't ever got to talk to somebody who, recently experienced it or, from an analytical standpoint. So I'm really excited for this.
Yeah.
So is this your first anime, or would this be your second, or was this your first anime series? Because I know that you watched Perfect Blue, right?
Yeah. So no, I'm not like a complete I'm not completely new to anime. I just haven't seen a lot of it. So first and foremost, I actually do have a daughter, and she loves anime. She is like all the genres, all the shows, everything, right? And I loved what you had to say about animation being more of, a medium than a genre. And I think that's something that we've seen more recently with the expansion, because people forget, like 20 years ago, like you really couldn't just get anime. Like it was a very specialized thing. And you always had that like friend of a friend of a friend whose dad had some sort of inroad to like Region 2 discs, and they had all the anime, but like it wasn't something that normal people could just access and slot in with all of the other medias and all of the different animation, the US animation and stuff. So I didn't grow up on it because of that, and but it's been something that I've been getting into recently. So by now I have seen Cowboy Bebop. That was actually my second introduction to anime, my first being Death Note.
Nice.
And I loved both of those, and so then I started getting into it, and then I started, and then I got really deep actually into the Berserk manga. By the way, do you say manga or manga? This is a point of contention in the household.
This is an excellent question. I try to say manga. I think I am known in some circles as a bit of a pedant, though.
Okay.
So that's possible, but I feel like it's respectful, and I'm always only attempting to be respectful when I say manga, so I generally say manga.
I say manga as well, but I think it's actually manga from what my daughter has to say.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't know. She also gives me crap because I say Yakuza, and apparently like that's cringe.
Well, I believe it's Yakuza, right? But it's the overcorrecting white guy is a thing that we might just have to be, man. Like, it is the
Again,
time
it's
of
like
the...
this stuff is new to us. We didn't grow up on it. Like, you've had experience, and the thing is too, also the representation, like authentic Asian representation was not around in the 90s. They were broad stereotypes used for comedic purposes. See Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom for examples.
Well, and even to your point of Cowboy Bebop, I mean, some of the creators have used pretty harsh language, describing their own creations. They're like, oh yeah, he was meant to be this particular stereotype of a character, and you wouldn't repeat it now, but it's like, that's how they were talking that way because they knew those stereotypes existed and it was a shorthand to communicate that thing. Does that excuse it? Not necessarily. But to your point about how it used to have this I'm going to do it. It used to have this esoteric nature to it where you couldn't just grab something off the shelf. You had to know somebody who knew somebody who was a little older than you. And I think that really added this level of like taboo-ness, taboo,
or like
feeling to it. Yeah, because it was like, not only can I not easily access it, but I know they're drawing pictures of stuff that I have never seen people draw pictures of stuff before. Like you can look at the title and go, there's something in this movie that I want to see, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It could be violent. It could be graphic in some other way, but as a, 10 to 13-year-old boy, for my personal example, it really did amplify all those feelings of I have to know what's here. So I guess to actually answer your question from 25 minutes ago, I've seen, Escaflowne, I've seen Cowboy Bebop, I've seen Death Note. I loved Death Note. I've seen Neon Genesis now. I watched a few of the Netflix series. I loved their Castlevania. I liked Knights of Sidonia. So I've watched anime, but I don't want to say a lot because there is so much of it.
Yeah, it's deep. And definitely.
I like to think that I've hit the big ones, but I'm sure there are still ones that I've missed. For example, Berserk, I have not seen the anime adaptation of that, and I am definitely ready for it, but there's just so much of it. The depth and breadth of the medium is vast.
Yeah, definitely. I don't quite recommend the series. I've actually watched like all of them, and they just keep remaking the same storyline over and over. I think they have 3, including the movie and the 2 series. They've told it like 3 times now. And of course, I'm a sucker for it, and I still jump in every time. If you can, I would definitely say read the mangas, but also like they're pretty brutal and they definitely get a little porny at times. Like it's definitely not for kids, and there's certain times where you're just like feel kind of dirty for reading like these like 2 to 3 issues. Like I think it's like 14 through 17 or something particularly, but then also like everything outside of that is like amazing and incredible. Like it's super dark. Like I really like dark supernatural stuff, and so when you start bringing in like cosmic horror and elder gods and different dimensions and stuff like that, like I'm there every single time. You've got my $15.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like, I mean, there's definitely cultural connotations to that stuff, right? Like it is a little porny to use your term, because it's like when we imposed, the post-war like rules for their culture, it was like, here, don't talk about this stuff, don't talk about that stuff, like it's going to be this way now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me how it just seems like culturally Japanese media seems more willing to explore the taboo nature of being a person, right? Like
sure.
the things that most Western media shies away from, it seems like there are 14 anime series per like mental hang up, right? So which I think is great, but to your point, it does create so many access points, different access points. You could be into that dark supernatural thing. I used police procedurals to get my wife to watch Death Note because she does not like anime, specifically is anti-anime, but she likes police procedurals in Law and Order. And I was like, what if there was a guy chasing a guy? And she's like, oh, I'm into this. And then, you kind of
Did that work, by the way? Because it sounds like we have very similar wives.
Dude, she loved it.
Oh, wow, that's crazy.
So she got partway through, and then like the Ryuk shows up, and she was like, "Okay, he's super cute, and I love that he loves apples. I'm totally here for this." And then once Misa showed up, she was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm sold on this." So she just needed that inroad. Now, I'll be totally honest with you. I haven't been able to get her to watch a second anime series since then.
Sure.
But that one, it was squarely within her wheelhouse,
Yeah.
right? And I knew that there were elements of it that she would dig, and it worked. So
Nice.
it's kind of like with any, I mean, that's sort of the essence of my show, is getting
Yeah.
people that I think will like a thing to watch it despite their resistances.
Sure.
But I mean, anime, like we were saying, it's just so wide. So if you can just take, one or two of your interests and pinpoint that. So I guess for this show, your interests would be like sci-fi and angst.
Yes, like if you like watching giant robots fight, but you also like to question your relationship with the universe and your place within it and what existence means, and like basically if you like Robotech, but you've always wanted it with a healthy dose of existential dread, this is the show for you.
Yeah, if you've ever been looking for a show that perfectly captures your experience of watching it like via its own main character, I think that this is a good example of that, where Shinji has no idea what is happening 90% of this show, right?
Yeah.
And he says as much. And it's like, I mean, even from the start of the series, he's riding this elevator past this giant robot hand, and then when he gets up to the robot head, he's surprised.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, were you not paying attention? But to answer the question, no, he was reading in a book. So it's like, there's so much to look at in this series that you're like, okay, what is happening? And then by the time you feel like you're catching up, all the rules are changing episode by episode. And it's just like, I feel like I know where this started, but I have no idea where it is going, which I gotta say, I think that's an accomplishment, because to get me invested in a narrative that I don't understand, like for a good portion of it, right, is impressive.
And that's exactly my experience too. And that's what we're going to do here, is specifically because I had the same with you. I really enjoyed my experience, but I was like, there's so many loose hanging threads, or I feel like themes were touched upon and maybe they were explained and maybe they were went into and I missed it, but maybe it wasn't. And so I really kind of wanted to break down a lot of the more metaphorical elements, is really just, and specifically focus on the last basically like 6 episodes. So I'm actually a big physical media guy. So I actually went out and bought this on Blu-ray. I actually don't have streaming Netflix. I'm one of those guys that has the red envelope Netflix still. You may not have even knew they still had it, but they do.
I heard, yes. I remember you guys talking about that on a prior episode.
Yeah, you get all the Criterions on there and like just random ass Blu-rays. I got 1993's California the other day, which just like, again, it's random ass movies that are really hard to find everywhere else. Like they always have them there. So it's super cool to have. But anyway, so all of that to say, big physical media supporter. I went out, bought the Blu-ray, because at the end of the day, if it sucks, I'm going to be able to flip it for like, 3/4 of what I got it for at least, which is the price of a month of Netflix or better. So anyways, That's kind of how I approach that. Thankfully, I really loved it and I'm not giving it up for the life of me. But for anybody else who gets the actual Blu-ray disc, we're just focusing on, it's not the last disc, because the last disc has End of Evangelion, which we'll get to later. It's the second to last disc and it has the last 6 episodes. So again, if you do have that Blu-ray disc, we're just focusing on that disc 5, episodes 21 through 26. Yes, including the infamous final 2. Which we'll go into later. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go all over the place, but we're going to use these final 6 episodes as sort of a narrative springboard to help keep us on track. If you've listened to the show before, you know that I can definitely go on tangents. If you listen to Jesse's show, he can do the same. So the two of us together, I mean, shit, it's taken us 20 minutes just to get started on the discussion. So that should tell you something right there. We're going to focus on these last 6 episodes. And so where I'm going to start out is episode 21. Now, Jesse, when this starts out, this is basically where we see a lot of that grainy footage of the year 2000. And it's basically going back to sort of right before the second impact occurred. Okay. And we sort of see these scientists, they're, squabbling, and we hear a lot of narration. And then all of a sudden these alarms blare and we see the outline of this like giant energy sort of being before it quickly cuts out. Okay, and we're gonna come back to that a little bit later. Especially if you've seen End of Evangelion, you should sort of know what that is. By the way, I will say Evangelion and Gelion and interchange the two of them because before I watched it, I was certain it was Evangelion. It just sounds natural, and then they started like gutting the G, and so I'm like, crap. But you're gonna hear both pronunciations.
Yeah, and they won't even give me an Evangelion. It's like Evangelion. It's like the most non-obvious pronunciation of the made-up word that they could have gone with. But yes, I think it's a beautiful word, but yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so let me just again, there's a lot to go into. We expect that pretty much everybody listening has, seen the series at least once. I will just a quick reminder of sort of where we're at here. So this is the episode where they basically sort of reveal the origins of Nerve and the origins of the Magi supercomputer. So we've got Nerve, which is the shadow division of the government that is dedicated to supposedly fighting the angels to prevent the third impact. Also was predicted by the Dead Sea Scrolls. I love how they just like threw that whole thing in there where it's like, okay, now on top of that, there's like these religious prognostications and such. Like they just jam so much in here. But it's this organization is run by, the foremost it's by Commander Ikari, Gendo, who's Shinji's father, as well as Zile, which is the organization, the board members that are typically represented by these monoliths with these like digital readouts. And then again, we have the Magi, which are these three supercomputers who are the creation, by the way, just in case anyone was unclear. So the Magi system was created by a character, Naoko Akagi. I do apologize if I'm butchering the pronunciations. And she is Ritsuko's mom. Ritsuko is the blonde character that is actively managing the Magi system throughout most of the series. So this, and then it's pretty soon where we get the sort of explanation of what happened there. And when she created the Magi system, they're essentially biocomputers. And I wanted to ask you about some of the nature of biomechanics that kind of comes up in here. So She basically was like, look, I took three elements of my personality and imbued them into these supercomputers. Casper, Balthazar, and Melchior are their names, which, by the way, remind me very much of the oracles from Minority Report. And I'd love to know if Philip Dick inspired him or if this guy inspired Spielberg, like who inspired who. I would love to know. But so my specific question for you, Jesse, is there's like the whole notion of like biomechanics, right? And it's kind of like lightly touched on, but it's not necessarily explored in detail. But it's kind of a fascinating topic of discussion. So I guess my question to you specifically is with regard to the exact nature of the EVAs. And by the way, if you don't like have necessarily answers figured out, like you could sort of just walk us through your process. Like I have a lot more questions than answers, even after breaking down a lot of the aspects of the show, right? But so we've got essentially two main biomechanical entities. And the first is the Magi supercomputer system. And then the second are the EVAs themselves, which we're sort of told at different points are humans and also machines or a hybrid of both. So I guess my question to you is specifically with regards to the EVAs, like, do you have a theory as to just like very specifically what they are, how they came to be, what exactly a marriage of machinery and biology they are?
So I feel like we cannot talk about this particular exact topic in this particular exact show without touching on the penetrative nature of 90% of the imagery in the show. Like,
okay.
There's a lot of insertion going on. There's a lot of things within other things. Some of the angels particularly have very phallic shapes. The merging of genders is a very important piece of this story. We've got the female receptacles that the male pods go into, right, with the pilots in them, etc. But then that pilot has to allow themselves to be filled, from within by the LCL fluid. So there's like very complicated penetrative politics, I guess, for lack of a better term, going on with all of this technology, and I think this biotechnology, and I think that it really fits well because the nature specifically of Gendo Ikari seems to be excessively exploitative, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And of all the people around him. And to be clear, he believes that is coming from a good place. Like, he's doing it because he really thinks he's trying to save humanity. So he in his head, he's justified. But I feel like the Magi supercomputer was definitely, he feels like that guy that can push people to get to the answer, but he will never take the risk himself, right? So it's like he pushed Ritsuko's mother to the edge of, what if you built a living, thinking supercomputer? And they got to the edge, and she went, I can't go further without installing a human mind, but I don't know if that will work. And then he went, oh, okay, well, then I guess he probably said, we'll shut it down then, knowing that would cause her to insert her own mind. And it really feels like he is all about manipulating specifically the women in his life to, serve a purpose. He sees them as an instrument. He sees all of humanity as an instrument. He literally named his project after it. So, to him, these are all just pieces of a biomechanical puzzle. And it feels grossly sexual in a way, but it's also, I don't know, it's somehow beautiful, right? The sleek nature of these robots. Like, when somebody tells you giant robots, despite having specifically never seen an entire Gundam series, I always picture Gundams, right? Big square triangle, slow moving guys. I don't know that they're slow moving because I haven't seen the series, but they look slow, they look clunky, they're very blocky by design. Transformers are the same way to me. These are like sleek, organic looking robots, to your point. And I feel like, it is touched on that each of these suits has an ideal pilot. And there's no way that could be the case without there being some sort of connection, right?
Yeah.
And we start to learn early on that, like, maybe the reason that they're called children has something to do with the nature of why they are pilots and things like that. But I really landed at the end of it. I really landed in squarely the camp of Gendo convinced Ritsuko's mother to put her brain into a supercomputer and become the Magi. And then he convinced Shinji's mother to put her body and mind into the structure that was provided by an angel to become the Eva. And then, the woman who birthed Shinji then allows Shinji back into her body, her protective womb, and uses it to save humanity. Like, my daughter is almost 3, so I consider myself a new parent still.
Sure.
If there was a way that I could wrap myself around my daughter to protect her from the world at all times, you bet your ass I would do that. Yeah. So I fall squarely within that school of thought as to what the Evas are.
Yeah.
And
well, let me ask you this specifically then, just touching on the Evas. So there's this whole notion that they may or may not be like objectively sentient to a degree, and I guess that's kind of more what I'm interested in understanding from you is basically, where do you think the line between their synergistic relationship with the pilots versus being autonomous is? Because we sort of are told, both elements. Like, we're told that the Evas can't really operate at full capacity or optimum or whatever without pilots, right? And that's the whole nature of the show, is that all of our main characters are pilots of these Evas. And yet, even early on in the first, when Gendo is first trying to convince Shinji, and I forget what happens. I forget if an angel attacks or something, or if maybe some of the infrastructure is about to fall on him. But then the EVA 1 unit, like on its own, without having a pilot, like protects Shinji, right? Which obviously tells us that there's either a level of autonomy, or perhaps one thing I had considered is that, we have three Evas and we have 3 supercomputers. And so perhaps with the Magi, maybe the Magi have some level of control with the Evas.
That could be too.
Yeah, so I guess, like, I know it's kind of hard to necessarily settle on any one, again, objective truth, because so much of this is open to interpretation. But did you kind of land anywhere with regards to what I just mentioned?
So I think that I actually landed on, because I sort of view the whole thing as Gendo being domineeringly bad, or at least exploitative, right? I think for me, I landed on there are human personalities that have been chained to these machines and then subdued with every technological, biological means that this person has. I feel like most of the, fluid is there to like keep the personality locked away in the Ava. I feel like there are human personalities locked in there because that feels the most Gendo thing to me.
Sure.
I don't know if the series, I don't know if the series visual evidence corroborates that, but that's how it feels to me. And that there is that scene early on with the eye where it kind of opens up from the slit and looks directly at Shinji. And to me, there was that look of recognition. Like, I don't know how to describe that because it's an animated thing, but it felt like a recognition. And to me, that really lends well to this being the soul or the remaining personality pieces of Shinji's mother locked in this machine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's largely corroborated by, there was a quick scene at the end and I wasn't quite sure what the meaning of it was, but it's when Ritsuko does the reveal about, Rei and the vessels and all of that. And right before that, she shows the, like, what Shinji refers to as an Eva graveyard. And we sort of see like a lot of these sort of like spines and whatnot. And so I sort of came to the conclusion as well that like, it's probably some degree of experimentation where it's like they've developed some way to fuse machine and man, and to where, so that these machines ultimately have souls and are individual beings. But it's, it was new technology that they had to work through. So the Eva graveyard was, I think, just sort of reinforcing that idea. Again, they're just sort of taking humans and machines and trying to meld them into this like new unique being. But it's not really explored in the depth that a lot of the other elements of the show are,
Oh, absolutely. But I feel like that is what they're talking about when they mention the sync rates, right? Like, I think that there is sentience there, but I think it's been dulled. And I think that it's a caged animal, right? They've taken a human.
That's a good point.
They've taken all of the thinking prowess and the will to survive, right? And they've put it into this little box and put it in the back of this thing's head. And then they gave somebody else control of that a couple different ways. So it's a caged animal. I mean, there's even an episode referred to as the Beast, and it's drawing parallels between some of the angels and some of the Avas and Shinji, honestly. So I think that exploration of human nature dictates that there has to be some kind of sentience that has been stripped and shamed and placed in these machines, right? Because they give them back their humanity with that sync rate, and that different pilot sync rate per Ava, I think, is like you had mentioned, that's got to be, there has to be something to that. And I think that it's the genetic connection, because when that eye opened up, it looked like recognition to me. And again, I don't know how to explain that.
I typically thought that the sync rates would be related to like the mind of the pilots connecting with the body of the Eva. But now that you're mentioning it, I think it's probably more in line to assume that it's basically like a mind meld, and it's basically the pilot's ability to meld its psychology with the psychology of the original human that is now part of this biomechanical being in the form of an Eva, as opposed to maybe just locking into its physicality. So I could definitely appreciate that.
I think part of that is supported by there is a scene where Asuka and Shinji are in the same cockpit, and she goes, "Are you thinking in Japanese right now?" Yeah. And it's like, which of course is strange, because in the dub that's presented by English, but it gives you this cognitive dissonance where you go, "Oh, people in other languages think in other languages."
Yeah.
And you'd have to like take that into account. And so there's even an additional layer there of, because he can't go, okay, well then I'll think in German. Now, fortunately, she's a polyglot and amazing, and she just like goes, well, I guess I'll just think in Japanese then.
Yeah.
But it's there is something about it that screams those individuals are the ones that have to be there. And I think part of that, part of what I like about that is that when we see that first Eva kind of lose it and go berserk, the first thing it does is try to attack Gendo, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's like, okay, maybe they weren't 100% willing participants, or maybe he glossed over some of the details or something, Like,
Well, yeah, no, I think it's just a case of, the experimented animals, finally got a chance to enact retribution. And so that's their initial, or almost anyways, and that's their initial response to that. So, yeah. And, moving forward from there, we also have the whole nature of Rey and the part that she plays and everything. And that's obviously, that plays into the Evas, that plays into Gendo and Yui and the relationships. And what we soon learn is that Naoko actually ended up committing suicide because she learned through the Rey character that Gendo was no longer in love with her, was just using her for his aims, much to your point. And and I think that, the Gendo character, he is, to me, I don't know that he's supposed to be sympathetic. I know that he does believe that what he's doing is saving humanity. And you could argue that at the end of the day it does, but I think that I don't think that's the point. I think that the show is rightfully critical of how he goes about it. And I think that it's, there's a lot of people that subscribe to the idea of the ends justifying the means. And I don't think the creator of the show is of that mindset. I think that
Agreed.
I think that the show believes there's a right and wrong way to go about doing things, and Gendo is absolutely going about it the wrong way. And we see that through the wake of devastation that he just leaves with everything he touches. And the funny thing too is, you mentioned earlier that he was a manipulator of women, and that's true, but he also manipulates men to the same exact degree. I think it's the way he does it, because with the women, he always ends up taking advantage of their bodies. They obviously have a sexual relationship. I'm sure it's, just a matter of physical pleasure for him. He doesn't seem like he particularly loves them or anybody, but he's obviously manipulated Shinji through the entirety of the show and does not give a lick that he's like messing with this kid's psychology whatsoever. Like, he's just using him to his aims, and by the end of it, he will have been manipulating Zile, which is 12 of the most powerful men in the entire world that apparently have the ability to shape the future of humanity and the universe, or at least Earth, right? So, yep. This dude is literally just playing everyone all the time for his own means.
It's true, and he is some sort of master psychologist, because he knows full well that he's messing with Shinji's psychology, right?
Yeah.
Like, the scene earlier on in the series when Shinji shows up, they're having a power outage, and he's like, "Oh, how did they get the plug in the machine?" And she goes, "Oh, your father had faith that you would be here in time, so he got ready for you." And it's like, dude, no. Like, if the machine doesn't work, everyone dies. So put the plug in and hope the guy shows up. It's not that. But he told her, when you see him, tell him that, because that's the only way he's going to get in there and do this effing job, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I agree with you 100%. The series is going, this is not how you do this. And when you try to assign people identity or, agency, rather than allow them to do that themselves, there is some serious backlash going on.
Sure.
And to your point, even if it ends up in a positive outcome, in air quotes, you cannot justify that to the people that you used as tools to get there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that even, by the end of it, we get those shots where like everybody either killed themselves or was shot by him or, whatever. But again, just like pretty much like, he's the king, the Midas of death, right? Everything he touches turns to blood and death and destruction. Now, but we did talk about, and this is kind of what makes him an interesting character and potentially keeps him from being an outright villain in the eyes of certain people, even though he's obviously still the antagonist driving everything forward. And that's that, so there's two things going on here, okay? There is the Zile plan. Now, that's one thing. And then we soon learn that Ikari, Commander Gendo Ikari, is actually playing Zile for his own aim. And I kind of want to go into a little bit about what exactly each of those were specifically. I think that Gendo's aim to me was a little bit more clear than Zile. And so if you have more color on that, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. But that's that So very okay, flat out, this is my question. I'll give it a little color and then I'll pass it off to you. My direct question is, what exactly are Zile's plans? Okay, now we know that it has something to do with triggering the third impact, which will essentially wipe out humanity, but in not the same way that Gendo's instrumentality plan will. So before I go into it, let me just pass it to you and say, like, what is your opinion of what's going on here?
Okay, so having viewed Zile up to this point as the monolithic, New World Order, Illuminati, whatever trope you would like to apply to them, they're in charge of everything. I had an assumption that they were like, oh, we will retreat to either, maybe a space station or some sort of ultra deep base where we're pretty sure we'll survive and we'll just let everybody else die. We're fine with that. Because we have the resources at the end to rebuild and, this, that, and the other thing. Sure. I don't 100% know that that's the case, but at some point you have to start going if everybody, the only goal that any of these groups could have would be survival, I would think.
Right.
But we start seeing this, to your point, at the start of episode 21, we start seeing the origin of Nerve, and it's like, or Nerve, but
Nerve,
it's like we kind of we'd been led to that point already where it's like there has to be angel involvement at the start of Nerve, right? There just has to, because the technology jumps are too wacky to just be something that somebody figured out. So it becomes obvious at some point, okay, the angels are involved in the birth of Nerve more than just as an organization to stop them. They're involved as some of the actual substance of how this works. So I don't know if Zile is a, nuke it all and hopefully survive, or if it's we want control via possession of information. Because to me, they seem very not post-human, I guess. What would the term for that be? Current human? They just have regular people goals. They have capitalist goals and they want to survive and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but it actually, that might be it, because it pairs well with this sense of the series starts oh, the world could be ending. And then takes a lot of time to show you that there are a lot of people that still have to go do their laundry on the weekend and spend time in school at classrooms and figure out where the money for this organization is going. What? Isn't the world ending? Shouldn't all the resources be focused to Nerve, and shouldn't everybody be constantly freaking out all the time about angel attacks and the end of humanity?
Yeah.
Don't you think? But I mean, they do show, there is some cover up going on and this, that, and the other thing, but I'm come on. At some point, all of the governments of the world would go, okay, we just have to stop this. It can't be about money, right? So I don't know, because it comes to, I feel like if there's one thing that Gendo Ikari could be said to have done good, it would be to bypass the bureaucracy of the oligarchs, right?
Sure.
But did he do that for his own purposes again? Or
I'm
was
sure.
it an actual...
I'm sure he did. Yeah,
right.
100%.
Because
That's his character.
And they sent Kaworu, right? They were the ones who are saying, okay, here's the pilot. We'll provide the pilot. And then that's just the beginning of the downfall. But it's if he's been playing them the whole time, then that was his idea, right? He knew that they needed some sort of chaos agent. And you're right that it makes it very difficult to extricate which threads are which. So
here's kind of and again, I don't know that it's fully fleshed out, but it's kind of something to go on. So initially it was okay, probably a case where, again, they're the New World Order, they're the Illuminati, maybe they're striving for control, right? Maybe they're not in control, but they're striving for control. And so basically they're hey, let's wipe the whole thing out and, be in control of all the resources and start anew in our image. And then, we'll be the rulers of the world moving forward. I still think that that's in essence the main aim of their plan, but there are some clues that show up later, one in specifically, where it specifically hinges around the Avas. Okay, there is a scene later. It's where they're interrogating Ritsuko, where they actually have her stripped down naked, and they're basically trying to go to the next phase. And they basically say, and it's after Ikari commands Rey to grab the Spear of Longinus and to use it to destroy the angel. Again, we'll get to that in a second, right? But what happens there is, in response, the board, Zile, says, why did he order her to throw the Spear of Longinus away? We only have 8 of the 12 Avas done. We still need the four other Avas to be finished and completed before we can enact our plan, which does hinge apparently on the Spear of Longinus, because them not having that anymore was like a problem, right? So I think that kind of where this all led me to is that they do want to create a new world order, and their aim is kind of similar in the sense of like they do want to evolve mankind to like the next stage of evolution. And in their eyes, rather than being a unified energy being, so to speak, it's the Avas. The Avas themselves are the next stage of evolution. And so I believe that they're trying to set this up to, in essence, birth the Avas as the new race of humanity that they will be in charge of.
I think you are correct. And if Gendo has his gloved white fingers in everything, which we know that he does, then perhaps that's his backup, right? His plan is new humanity no matter what. Sure. If it's LCL energy being, cool. If it has to be Avas, that's the backup plan. Whatever it is, I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the essence of what makes his ends not justify it, right? Because it really is selfish. He's like, I will be there. I will usher this in, that sort of a thing. And I mean, it's a classic main character thing to do, but I think that's a brilliant point, and I think I am landing on it now. Like, I think I'm having a moment of realization where Zele was his backup to his own plan, and he convinced them that they were the ones implementing it. And I'm sorry, I have to just comment on the pure coolness of throwing a space spear through a freaking monster head and into orbit. Like, I'm sorry. That is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
There's just, it doesn't matter how old we are, we're always going to have that like 14-year-old boy in us that's just like robots and monsters and space tritons and like, yes, interstellar beings. I love this. Give me more. And that's what's so cool. And I think that's what allows, I think that's what's so interesting about Neon Genesis Evangelion is it's like they take that stuff and then they're like, but we know that like, you can't just like Transformer battles. So like, here's a healthy smattering of like psychological examinations for you to feel grown up about. And you're like, sweet. Thanks, Neon Genesis. Now let's get back to the robots.
Oh, man, it's like, dude, okay, when I was watching this, my thing, I'll be honest, the first time that I watched this, I watched it with my arms crossed because people were like, it's one of the greatest series ever. And I'm like, it's about giant robots. How cool could it be? And I was like, part of my resistance to it was there's going to be no point of relatability in this because I'm not a robot pilot, right?
Yeah.
But you know what I have been is a prepubescent teenage boy. And oh my God, poor Shinji. This whole series, it's like every humiliation, every like awkward moment, every uncertainty about just what do I do with my hands? How do I exist in a room with other people? Like they somehow captured that so neurotically accurately that it really does stress you out when you're watching the show. Like it gives you this really uncomfortable point of relatability. And I think that's what makes the rest of it so effective.
Absolutely. And so, I told you off air and at the top of the show that like, I didn't really want to do like a ton of research and go over a lot of the stuff that's already out there. But one of the things I did come across, it's because it's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, let me get a re-summary, and then like they'll throw in some info and you're like, but then it's something good to consider, which is when I as soon as I finished the show, like I was like, oh, I feel like this is the result of intense psychotherapy. Right? It feels like the creator of this show was Shinji and really like worked through a lot of stuff through some intense psychotherapy and, then imbued a lot of that into this show as, sort of an artistic expression of that. Yeah. And sure enough, it does turn out that was the case, where the creator actually suffered a 4-year bout of depression I mean, obviously there's always, genetics and stuff that parlay in, but I guess the straw that broke the camel's back is, and I forget the project, but he had a project that he put a lot of, time, effort, money into, and it basically just like bombed after a series of bombs. And it was just that like, what am I doing with my life sort of thing. And, and I think especially, look, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people in the podcasting community, myself included, that, have definitely had challenges with regards to, mental health issues. And I know that, a lot of people that even before, with the last couple of years in COVID and the isolation and, how different people were affected in both their lives, their professions, everything else, I think just, the nature of specifically anxiety and depression in regards to like mental health issues as a whole is definitely something that, much more of the population today, certainly here in the U.S., I can't speak to other countries, but certainly here in the U.S. can identify with and allows for, because it may be difficult, especially for some of the younger people, to realize that like it was only about 20 years ago that mental health issues started to become destigmatized, before then, anybody who went to therapy was a frickin' loon, right? And that's just the way it was. And that's how all of us thought. And that's how we thought as a country. And it's really... like, I'm very impressed with us as a country to be able to move past that and get to a point where we can look at the mind the same way we do as the body. And it's like, look, dude, every now and then, yeah, just by virtue of living, your body's going to get a cold or, it's going to come into contact with this and it's going to break down for a few days and you're going to have to, rest and recover and let your sort of, intrinsic self take care of itself. And the mind is no different, and this series definitely explores a lot of that.
It does. And that's an excellent point. And to that point, I think that this is probably, okay, I come from the world of analyzing anime adaptations, right? That's currently what my show is covering is the live action adaptation of Cowboy Bebop. It got a lot of hate. Part of my goal is to be a positive force for that show. I mean, it's been canceled, but definitely go give it a second look and watch it with an open heart the way you would an anime. But I think to that point, a lot of people, because there have been years of here comes the American live action Evangelion, right? Those reports have been on the internet pretty much since the internet started being popular. It was like, well, America's going to get a hold of this at some point and it will be bad. And I think to your point, I think the reason that a lot of people were worried about it is because they knew most American storytellers for the last 10, 15, 20 years wouldn't handle the nuances of the psychological piece of this story correctly, or they wouldn't pay it enough attention, right? Yeah. They would go, oh, cool, a story about giant robots. And actually, if we're being real, did you see Pacific Rim? Because that's kind of what Pacific Rim did. And
I thought the same thing, too. I was like, they obviously borrowed a lot.
Yes.
Because I saw Pacific Rim before Evangelion, and so after that, I was oh, that's where like 3/4 of their ideas came from. Cool. Continue.
Yeah. And they stripped... I don't fault the movie. It was a lot of fun to watch. And I'm not in the business of I'm not in the business of offering a lot of criticism. If you've ever listened to my show before, mostly because I like to be positive, but also because I don't have a lot of creative talent behind me to go, I could do better. And I know that's not a requirement, but it's one of those things that still feels weird to me. But that having been said, I think I would agree that for the last, maybe until now, we probably wouldn't have been able to get a good adaptation of this because that piece would be left by the wayside or not properly respected. But I mean, now if it were to happen, it might be better. But I not to jump ahead, but there is new Evangelion being made by the original creators currently. I think it either just finished or it's about to finish, but I haven't dived into any of that personally. Yeah. But point being, there's still an appetite for this kind of storytelling, for deeply personal yet wickedly cool to look at storytelling. Like that is the essence of anime, right? And for that reason, I think Neon Genesis Evangelion is part of the essence of anime.
100%, man. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and let's jump back to where we left off in terms of the storytelling. So we've also haven't really touched on Asuka's character at all. At this point in the show, like she's completely broken down, right? So it was already, she had a lot of repressed memories with regards to her mother. And, it's revealed that her mother ended up not only committing suicide, but had a very severe mental illness where she basically believed that her doll was in fact her daughter, and as such just completely ignored Asuka. And that's where Dad, they don't even go into it, but, if he was ever there, he left very, very early on. So it was just her and her mother suffers this, very severe mental illness, and so she's left on her own. And so that's obviously where, over the years, she developed this, overcorrection where she's just hyper independent, and we ultimately learn that all of that is really just a cover for these deep-seated insecurities that relate to being abandoned. And I think we even see that her mom was trying to convince her to take her own life with her. Mm-hmm. And it was very, very intense stuff, And and then on top of that, the angel that she's fighting also has this psychological weapon that blasts a beam of psychological corruption that only brings these feelings to the surface more so. And then it pretty much completely breaks her down to the point where she's not even able to interact with her Eva anymore. So she's pretty much down for the count. And I also thought it was interesting too that the way that she's presented after all of this happens is very much the way that Shinji has been represented through most of it, And so she's been very critical of Shinji and his, depression and his inability to, take charge and all of this. And I thought it was very interesting that once she gets broken down and into a similar state, they actually cover her the same way. They use the same sort of slow push in, center frame, and the way that she looks down, her body language is very similar to Shinji's and her questioning herself. And so, it was kind of just an interesting arc to eventually bring her to that place that she's been so critical of, because she's such a strong character for most of the show.
Yeah, and she, up until that point, honestly, she could also just be seen as the loudest subconscious ever for Shinji, right? Because a lot of the stuff that she says is stuff that he probably thinks and feels about himself, but doesn't externalize it because that would mean that he actually is worthless, and he suspected that for a while, right? But she's she's obviously saying stuff like, come on, you're a man. You should be better at this. You should be not thinking about this. You should be past this, that kind of a thing. You should be, why are you worried about this kind of thing? And she also represents, back to my point of being the, non-confident, awkward, prepubescent teenage boy, she also represents that 1 or 2 years older than you girl, right, who's just got everything figured out, and her confidence is thrown in your face constantly because she's a year or two older than you. And it's man, that is very relatable, but you do as an adult, you're watching it and going, oh, she's just as much of a child as he is. That's so great. And she learned how to put up the facade before he did. Yeah. And yeah, going back to her origin though, it does make me wonder, because I feel like there's a version of this where everything that happens literally is something that was set up by Gendo, right? So yeah. I feel like there's a version where he meets Asuka's mother and then gets her pregnant and then mentally abuses her to the point where she's okay, I'm going to kill myself. And then he uses that moment to take her, ghost and put it into the Eva and then have Asuka drive that Eva. But it's because it's so hard to tell. Is she associating the Eva with her mother, or is some part of her mother actually there? Because we know there is an organic component to the Evas, right? Yeah. And if he stripped all of the parts of her that are capable of rational thought and understanding and empathy, then all that would be left is this crazy depressed lady who killed herself. Yeah. And it was that's his way of victimizing people. And as we mentioned before, he uses women for their bodies. So if he was able to take all of her agency from her mentally and just leave her in this shell, I think that the parallel there makes it fit, and it makes it more understandable why Asuka becomes so attached to her Eva. Yeah. Outside of the Eva being her contribution to society, right? Because she knows I could save the planet, and she has that teenage chutzpah, right? She's got the confidence that you have when you're 14 and you've succeeded at 2 things in a row. You're oh, now I'm unstoppable. So it's such a nuanced story with so many little points that are nebulous at the end of it still, that you're right to ask and to go what is the origin of each one of these pieces, and did Gendo, put all these things together? But if not, he's still just exploiting an orphan girl, and that's still awful. It's like there are so many ways that this could be awful.
Yeah, no, dude, you kind of just blew my mind right now, because like I'm now kind of wondering / like already immediately convinced of like two things that I just never considered before of. And that's the first is like, is Gendo Asuka's father? Like Gendo could absolutely be Asuka's father, because you've already talked about the fact that he's this master manipulator, and literally like this dude just showed up, got her pregnant, and bailed. That would 100% trend, and it would also keep in line with him being the master architect, where all of this stuff, like the way that Peter Jackson was out there planting the trees 20 years before he's been playing this for so long before anybody even knew what the hell was going on.
I cannot not give a shout out to my friend Cameron from the Green Shirt podcast. I know he was a guest.
Hey, and we had him on the show, actually. Cameron's a good friend of ours as well.
Lord of the Rings is that's why I bring him up. Lord of the Rings is one of Cameron's favorites, and that was a beautiful moment of synchronicity for me. But yeah, I mean, and
he actually just talked about it on Cheap Seat, by the way, too, which is also a friend of the show, Sean. Yes. And we're actually going to be on his show a couple months down the road. So yeah, we're all kind of connected, aren't we?
It is a small circle, but it is an exclusive circle. And when I say exclusive, I just mean that it's small, really, because we're welcoming people as long as they're willing to talk about stuff, right? I mean, but if you think about it, like if this is all Gendo manipulation, right? And he's the only one that has access and a relationship with Rei's mother in real life, and he's the only one that has access and relationship with Shinji's mother in real life. He's the only one that knows the whole story of Asuka. He knows there will be more children, right? He goes, they haven't found the fourth children yet. So he knows that there are more pilots out there. How could he possibly know that if he doesn't know where they're coming from? He could know that if he was just gone all the time, planting his seeds, so to speak, all over the world and going, someday, these will be the kids that I go back and get because my genetic mix with their mothers is what will make them compatible with the giant robots that I'm building in my creepy basement. And
totally,
it all fits. Like, I don't know if that's how it's
Absolutely.
supposed to be, but it does all fit, and it makes you really hate Gendo even more.
And let me ask you this. What are the chances that Eva 2, because we've talked before that the Evas are, if what we say is correct, they're basically taking humans and melding them with the Evas. Is Eva 2 her mom? And is that why the sync breaks down later once all of those emotions come back to the surface? Because
I think that's what it is, because it fits narratively.
That's
and
nuts.
I think that if you think 100%. About it from okay, so we come to know narratively that Rei has been and can be cloned, right? She's an artificial person, and she was experimental. The first Eva, Unit 0, is also experimental. We've seen it go berserk, like we've seen it have issues, that kind of a thing. It's not designed for some of the stuff the other Evas are designed for. So that was the first time that he manipulated a woman into putting her soul into a robot, and then he ran into problems, and he went, oh, okay, well then the next time I'll upgrade or I'll do things differently. So I think it fits, like, and it does start to raise questions though, like and I think it is making the point precisely that the soul, the ghost in the shell is what matters, right? Because without that, we see the fully autonomous robot one, we see that one just go berserk. So it's like, I think they are making the point that you have to meld humans and technology to solve a problem, but it's just done in such an exploitative, penetrative way. And it happens in both instances with the Evas and the Angels. Like there is the floating diamond angel has the drill bit. It's like a 17-meter drill bit they mentioned, but it also has a pulsating vein in that drill bit. So it's like there is a lot of penetrative, exploitative, bad.
You don't have to use too much imagination to connect those dots there. Okay, that's going to wrap up our discussion for today. We will be back in 2 weeks with part 2 of this discussion. It'll pick up right where we left off. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time on Esoterica Cinema.